This is a reading of Forgotten Toys, a Boohouse Books horror story written and narrated by Mark Steven Nordlund. Forgotten Toys is a Boohouse Books book, copyright Mark Steven Nordlund, all rights reserved. Find all ebooks, e-stories, and audiobooks by this author at boohousebooks.com. Theo kicked a plastic horse and die-cast monster truck away from his path across the carpet. He slapped his open palm on the top of a fresh beer bottle and pried the cap off with his chewed-up silver wedding band. Falling into the trashy-stained heap he called his easy chair, Theo turned his head towards the stairs and growled, "Desi, pick up your shitty toys before I pick them up for you!" He burped loudly after taking a heavy swig. "And take them out with the garbage," he added cruelly. He selected the television remote from a uniformly aligned row of device controllers and turned on the TV. Theo strictly believed there was a place for everything and hated when anything was out of place. There was a place for playthings, a place for the discarded, and a place for his ass. And that place was in his easy chair. That's how they did it in the service, and that's what he was used to. As far as he was concerned, it was the one and only way for everyone. Hurried footsteps descended the stairs, and the sound of small hands gathering toys could be heard from the hoppy belch cloud and airborne dust from the inhabited chair. Desi quickly stowed his trinkets in a wooden chest placed in the corner of the small living room and cautiously approached his father. He stood quietly beside him like a ghost, waiting to be noticed. Theo knew his son was there, but ignored him, hoping he would pick up on the nonverbal hint and leave him alone, as any perceptive adult would. But Desi was only 3, and had not yet attained such a skill. He just stood, his blond head inches from the electrical union patch on his father's shoulder, as the seconds became a minute. Stinging tension filled the room. "What the hell? What do you want?" Theo shouted. His son winced when his father reacted, but stood his ground out of pure desperation. "Are we going to the park today?" Desi asked. His big blue eyes stared up at his dad, begging for a yes in response. Theo sighed dramatically and rolled his eyes behind his eyelids, feeling the hard pressure of aggravation combined with annoyance. He wished his son knew what it was like to be an adult and understood that after a 10-hour shift, after 9 straight days of work, you just want to come home and not do shit. His expression hardened after another gulp of beer. "The park isn't going anywhere, bud. It'll be there tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. Dad just wants to relax. We'll go to the park another day, okay?" he answered coldly. Desi's disappointed eyes fell to the floor. He rubbed his nose and gathered enough understanding to outweigh his disappointment with forgiveness. He may have been only 3, but empathy was a perception he had attained very young. Desi placed his arms around his father's sleeve and hugged him. "I love you, Daddy," he said sincerely. Switching the beer bottle from one hand to the other, Theo ruffled his son's hair and patted him on the back. "You too, bud," he said. "Why don't you grab Daddy another beer? The tall ones, like this." He displayed his bottle, making the silver label visible. "Okay," Desi said happily. His little footsteps slapped against the carpet and then tile as he approached the refrigerator. Theo heard the fridge door open and then the momentary quiet of his son searching diligently. "The ones in the door?" Desi yelled. "Yeah, in the door," Theo answered. The sound of glass tapping against hollow plastic sounded before the door closed. The slapping steps approached. "This one?" Desi asked. His father euphorically took the bottle with a smile. "Yeah, that one." "Great job, buddy," he said. "You're really good at following directions," he praised. Desi's face lit up with pride. He jumped up and down on the tips of his toes. "I really am," he happily agreed. In Desi's other hand, he held a bottle of red Sports Aid. Theo hadn't seen it. He finished his first beer and popped the top off of the new one, taking a sip. "Dad?" Desi asked reluctantly. Theo swallowed. "Hmm?" he inquired. "Can I have this?" his son asked, showing off the drink. His eyes begged again. His father shook his head. No, those are for Dad for work. Where's your water cup? Drink that. The one your mom always gives you." Theo noticed the sadness in his son's silence again and felt a modicum of sympathy. He decided to compromise. "You can have one of the blue ones. Dad doesn't like the blue ones. You can have one of those." The little boy jumped with delight and raced into the kitchen. The fridge door swung open again. Theo was glad when he could serve up pure happiness with just words. Desi was at that age where words alone could induce profound elation without Theo having to actually do anything or perform any kind of action. Telling his son he could have a sports aid sure beat taking him to the park, setting up a train set, or having to get out of his chair. He dreaded the day that kind of service would no longer yield jubilation due to Desi's increasing age and inability to impress so easily. Desi shouted from the fridge, "There's blue ones, purple ones, red ones, and orange ones." "Take the blue one," Theo shouted back. "The others Daddy brings to work." "Blue?" Desi asked, just to be double sure. "Yes," he answered. "If it's blue, you can drink it. It's okay if Mom didn't tell you could have it." "Okay," Desi shrieked happily. Theo's eyes fell back on the TV as an ad for potato chips danced across the 60-inch screen. His stomach growled. "Grab me a bag of chips while you're in there, will ya?" he requested loudly. "Okay," his son repeated. The pantry door creaked open. More silence. Theo's eyes wandered the room as his son searched. He eyed the painting of the Mother Mary on the wall above a mantel decorated with photos of himself from his days in the Army. They sat beside a National Defense Service medal, his service patches, and a small worn teddy bear holding a red heart he received from his mother after basic training. She had died a week after giving it to him of a sudden brain hemorrhage. The bear was the only item he decided to keep in remembrance of her. He planned on giving it to his son when he learned how to take special care of things. According to Theo, that day was a long way off. A very long way off. As an unwelcome addition, a crucifix was added to the mantel by his wife. Theo scoffed at the meaningless trinket every time he laid eyes on it. This moment was no exception. The gold Catholic cross had no place among his coveted earned trophies that actually meant something real, and he hated the idea of the symbol included in his shrine to hard work, sacrifice, and achievement. The scam of faith, praying to a bearded man in the sky, and the man-made ideas of true reverence and true evil repulsed him. When his wife would go to church, she'd be gone all day, praying, Bible studying, eating stale crackers, and handing out his hard-earned money to the world's oldest pyramid scheme. He drove the thoughts out of his mind before they sent him into an unnecessary animosity spiral and focused on his beer. He took another swig. Desi returned holding the blue sports aid, but no bag of potato chips. "I can't reach," Desi squeaked with frustration. Theo burped again, then grunted. "All right," he groaned. He reached over and unscrewed his son's bottle cap for him, breaking the seal. Desi took a long, happy drink and then a big breath. A little blue mustache was left above his upper lip. Theo leaned forward and hauled his aching body off the chair and got to his feet as his son ran back into the kitchen. He sighed at the thought of taking the long walk to the pantry and back just for a snack. Desi pointed at the pantry, taking another drink of blue sugar. "It's on the top. I can't reach," he said. "All right," Theo snapped. "I'm coming." After 2 steps across the rug in his thin socks, he stepped on a razor-sharp plastic building block with the corner positioned directly at his heel. The toy pierced his fleshy padding and made him scream in pain. "God damn it, Des!" Theo roared. "I thought I told you to pick up these damn toys!" Desi stumbled back, shaken by his father's outburst, and dropped his drink on the floor. Blue liquid splashed across the tile. The empty bottle rolled, spilling sports aid in a curve from the pantry to the oven. Tears welled up in Desi's eyes. His mouth frowned sadly and his breaths became heavy. "I told you to clean this shit up," his father screamed, kicking the block at him. Theo's rage drove him into madness, fueled by lack of sleep and long work hours. "I was wrong! You're terrible at following directions," he exclaimed. His words spewed like acid. Desi covered his face with his tiny hands and sobbed with disgrace. The front door flew open. Allison's voice called out from the sharp sunlight pouring down the hall. "More bags in the car, I need help," she announced. Upon hearing his mother's voice, Desi sent himself into loud, unhinged crying. The type of crying he only exhibited for Mom. Allison quickly paced down the hall, holding grocery bags, her purse hanging from her shoulder and keys jingling from her fingers. She eyed the spill, her crying son, and her husband, standing in the living room. Desi ran to his mother and wrapped his arms around her leg, wailing madly. "What happened?" she asked. Theo wasn't about to tell her about the sports drink he allowed Desi to take after repeated strict instructions regarding what his son was allowed to consume. He wasn't in the mood for her bullshit or another lecture regarding his carelessness, temperament, or ignorance. His son's cries eased, reduced to breathy sniffles. Theo lied. I told him to get his water cup from the kitchen, and he stole one of my sports aids. I caught him when he was halfway through the bottle, and he spilled it on the floor. Desi turned his eyes up to his dad with tearful humiliation and betrayal. He continued to sob, this time for the questions and confusions that raced in his innocent adolescent mind. Why would his daddy say those things when he had made him so happy just minutes earlier, and after their enormous hug in the chair? Desi was sad, bewildered, and heartbroken. And he's constantly leaving his shit everywhere. How many times do I have to tell him to pick up his toys? Theo added. Allison rested the bags on the counter and picked up her son, holding him close. She whispered sharply to her husband, children make messes. That's what they do. It's up to us to teach them and clean up after them most of the time. That's what parents do. Her voice returned to normal as she addressed her son. Sweetie, you know you're not supposed to touch Daddy's drinks. They have too much sugar. Where's your water? She searched the kitchen briefly before grabbing a yellow sip cup from a cabinet and filled it with the filtered dispenser on the refrigerator door. Desi took the cup and drank from it eagerly, his eyes reddened and tired from stress. Allison pointed towards the hall. There's more bags in the car. Can you bring them in? She asked. I'll get the mess. Yeah, Theo said, not too eagerly. Oh, what'd the doctor say? He asked. Allison sighed. He said I need to quit smoking for the 1000th time. It aggravates the CVD. He said stay on the ACE inhibitors and beta blockers, maybe take up running. Fat chance, she said with an eye roll. I disagree. Smoking always calms me. Stress is what's going to kill me, she added. I'm sure you'll be fine. Theo waved his hand dismissively. He dragged his sore carcass toward the front door to unload the car as his wife took a mop from the closet. She slapped the mop head onto the blue spill and took a second, examining the sports bottle on the floor. She sighed and shook her head with irritation. Dark filled the living room. The only light blessing the space was the dim glow of the TV displaying a muted infomercial. Theo sat in his easy chair, wide awake, with an eighth beer in his hand and the remote control in the other. He stared at the floor as he thought about what he had done to his son. For some reason, the look on Desi's face when he had lied about the stolen drink bothered him. His pondering was interrupted by the familiar sound of Allison's approaching steps on the stairs. The living room light illuminated above. He listened for words but heard nothing for a few drawn-out seconds. Here we go, he mumbled to himself with pressing discontent. What is it this time? I want you to go to church with me on Sunday, Allison said sternly. It'll be good for you. And why the hell would I do that? He asked. Enmity grew in the back of his throat. His body tensed. Or go to therapy, counseling, or get some kind of help for your abuse to yourself and to your son. And to me, she stated. What the hell are you talking about? What did I do now? What in the goddamn did I do now? There's always something. What is it this time? Theo growled. He heard her swallow hard. You know I hate it when you talk like that. I know you do it because it bothers me. You never used words like that until we started fighting, Allison asserted. I'm not going to complain about the hours you work. I know that you can't help it, and I appreciate that you work so hard. But when you're here, you're always drinking, you're always in a terrible mood, and you're always snapping when I ask you to do something you should be doing anyway, as a father and as a husband. You need some kind of moral compass, a standard, an example to live by. You don't even have any friends you hang out with once a week, or at all. The husbands at my church go out together. They play golf, they go hunting, they talk about their families with one another, and they share insights with each other about running a household. Theo laughed at her. Oh yeah, I'm sure that's what they're doing together, sharing insights, he mocked sarcastically. I've seen what Catholic Bayside men do together, and their families are no part of it. They're taking off their wedding rings and sharing their dollars with strippers and bar floozies. And the only racks they're bringing back to their hunting cabins are attached to long legs and shaking asses. There's your moral compass. I come home after work. I'm here. I'm present, he argued. And I can't afford the quality of prostitutes your Dan Schuyler's and Bryce's share at their Ocean View penthouse downtown, he joked. I'm not asking you to join them specifically, Allison said. I'm asking you to interact with someone other than us and your foreman at work. Father Francine said that the head of a household needs to surround himself with positive examples to properly... Theo explosively cut her off mid-sentence. Father Francine, there it is. That's what this is all about, he complained. Tell me, what wise godly words did Father Francine bestow on you when you went to him complaining about me? Tell me, I'd love to know, he spat. Allison took a deep breath, gathering her courage after his ridicule. He said that you need to interact with other fathers and husbands with a right-facing moral compass to calibrate your awareness of duties as the head of our home, she stated. Theo rolled his eyes so hard his wife could see the expression through the back of his head. You come home from work and you disappear into your beer and your TV. I'm afraid to go out, go to appointments, run errands, and leave you alone with our son. You don't feed him, you don't give him anything to drink, and some nights I find him asleep on the floor and you asleep in your chair with the fridge left open and beer spilled on the carpet. You still haven't installed that child lock on the garage door and you leave your tools and car parts where Desi can get to them. What happens if you fall asleep and he gets into the garage and puts his hands on that chop saw you keep on the floor? Or the half cans of oil you leave everywhere? She asked. Her breath trembled with trepidation. I'm tired of the carelessness, the temper, and the ignorance. And most of all, the lies you tell to avoid confrontation that eventually lead to further arguing. Worse arguing than if you would have told me the truth. Theo clenched his fist to keep from screaming. He spoke harshly through his teeth. Our son isn't stupid. He knows to stay out of the garage. I've told him again and again not to touch anything in there. I am not careless. The only temper I have is towards you, and the only ignoring I do is because of your constant and narcissistic preaching about church, heaven, and God bullshit. Head of the household, my ass. Everyone knows that the head of every household is the wife. How do I know that? Because the only way husbands can have any fun is when they have to leave their own households to do it. Theo leaned forward, turned his head, and faced her. And I have never fucking lied to you, he snarled. Allison shook her head with blatant disgust. She threw her palm into the air and slapped her thigh. That's exactly what I'm talking about, she said flatly. What? He barked. How on earth could Desi drink half of one of your sports aids if you didn't unscrew the cap for him and break the seal? You know he can't open one of those by himself, she finished. She wiped a tear away from under her eye and turned her back. I've said my piece, she said softly. Allison ascended the stairs and disappeared around a corner. Theo was left speechless, staring at the wall she had been standing in front of. The words faith, love, and God were painted decoratively on the white drywall beside a floating shelf covered in artificial flowers. The message mocked him as he glared. Rage boiled in his gut, and his hatred for her, this house, and his needy son sent his blood racing through his veins. 3 days later, Theo trudged past the trash cans on the curb and up the path to his front door. He struggled to find his house key in the dark. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. He had just finished 11 hours of pulling wire for a new apartment complex on the south side of town. All he wanted was a shower, a beer, and to fall asleep in front of the TV. He figured he was lucky this morning. Allison and Desi didn't get up until 7, and he had a good 2 hours to himself. Not that it mattered. Allison hadn't spoken to him since their argument, and she was keeping Desi out of his way for the time being. He found the key, unlocked the door, and walked into blackness. Theo shut the door behind him and made his way down the dark hall, headed for the light switch. Suddenly, he slipped on what felt like ice under his boot and hit the ground hard. His head collided with the wall. Sharp pain surged from his head and shoulder as he sat up. His ankle was twisted and throbbing. He got to his foot, hobbled to the living room, and turned on the lights. A coloring book laid open beside him on the tile. The exposed page was stamped with a perfect boot print. The book had been the ice he had slipped on. His complexion reddened with fury, and what he beheld in the rest of the house sent his brain into irate spasms. Trucks, blocks, plastic food items, and crayons were scattered like confetti across the rug and furniture. A miniature kitchen set was tossed into his easy chair, and a row of rubber dinosaurs were placed uniformly on the entertainment center, blocking the TV. He wiped them onto the rug, revealing irremovable farm animal stickers covering the bottom of the plasma screen. He took the mini kitchen out of his chair and tossed it across the room. It smashed into plastic fragments against the wall and heaped into a pile on the floor. Theo's heart palpitated at the state of the room, but the last fiber suspending his sanity above madness snapped when he saw the remote controls. They had been placed one by one into a small row of play putty cups, bathing in green slime. He pulled the TV remote out of its cup as strings of goo dripped from the hard plastic. He pointed the controller at the TV and pressed one of the gooey buttons. The TV's screen did not illuminate. The remote no longer worked. Theo lost his mind. He threw the door leading into the garage wide open and dragged a brown trash can out into the living room. He began kicking all the stray toys into a pile around the can, stomping on some of them and breaking them into shards. Theo booted the dinosaurs, play food, horses, blocks, trucks, and crayons into the center of the room until an assortment worthy of a yard sale was stacked around the dirty, oil-stained can. Trying not to wake Allison, he crept up the stairs past the corner and opened Desi's bedroom door. The room was in the same state as the calamity downstairs, but Theo ignored it for now. He took the 3-year-old by the arm and pulled him out of bed. Desi woke up on his feet and began hyperventilating from his sudden arousal. "Let's go!" Theo demanded in a whisper. The boy began walking while being pulled towards the landing. His confusion and discombobulation sent him into whimpers. "Shut up!" his father spat through his teeth. Theo lifted him and descended the stairs, bringing his son into the bright light and before the pile around the can. Desi tearfully eyed the sight of his playthings surrounding the trash bin and began to cry. His father stopped him before he made a sound. "Stop it, right now!" The boy choked back his tears. "You will put every single goddamn toy from this living room floor into this barrel in 5 minutes or your bedroom will be next. Do you hear me?" Theo belted. Desi's breaths heaved again. His father pointed to the clock on the wall. "You have 4 minutes and 55 seconds left. Move!" he ordered. Salty water poured from the boy's eyes as he reluctantly placed each one of his toys one by one into the bin. Theo charged down the hall, opened the front door, and jogged down the driveway, looking down the street. The sun was on its way up, and the large headlights of an oversized green truck could be seen far off. He turned on his heel and returned to the house, entering the living room. Desi was hurriedly filling the can. 4 minutes left, move it! The clock ran down to time up as the child tossed the final broken truck into the trash can. Theo grabbed the bin by its handle and dragged it out the front door. He placed it on the curb just as the garbage truck pulled up. The brakes hissed as a man got out wearing brown gloves and dumped the plastic trove into the back on top of black and white bags, wet cardboard, and rotten food. Theo walked up the driveway, shut the front door behind him, and saw his son at the window. Desi was crying softly with his tiny hands pressed against the glass. He had just witnessed half of his things tossed away like trash into a big scary truck and would now have to watch it drive away. He sobbed into his little fists. The arson-like madness within Theo fizzed out after a few remaining sparks. A weight grew in his chest as he came back down into sanity and reason. The fury, the outlash, and the mania vanished like a satisfied spirit, and Theo was left with the horror of what he had just done. He stared at his weeping son. The sympathy he felt about the lie from days ago was nothing compared to the twisting regret and burning repentance he felt now. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to stop the truck and get his son's toys back. He wanted to make that little face light up with euphoria again, but it couldn't be done with words alone this time. Theo's eyes glazed. He felt a lump in his throat, and for the first time in years, he almost cried. He searched around the room for any toys that may have survived to salvage any kind of bond he had left between him and his child. The only toy left in the entirety of the room was his treasured teddy bear on the mantel. Theo's eyes rose to the bear's sacred spot beneath the painting. His heart sank into his stomach, and dread filled him. All at once, the rage returned. His mother's bear was missing. The photos, the medal, the stupid crucifix, and the army patches were all present and accounted for, but the bear was absolutely nowhere to be seen. "Des, where's my bear?" he asked his son. Desi turned his head away from the window and looked upon his dad with a bright red face and tired, sopping eyes. He sniffled and wiped his nose on his sleeve. "Where's Daddy's bear?" "The bear on the mantel. Did Mommy move it?" he asked in more detail, frantically. Mommy, she let me," Desi began. He wiped his face again. "Mommy let you what?" Theo snapped. "Mommy let you play with it?" His son just stared at him. Theo panicked. His voice cracked. "Where's my bear?" he thundered loudly. Desi lifted his hand slowly and pointed to the garbage truck outside by the curb. The truck's engine howled like a demon as the brakes released and the monstrous tires turned. "It's in there," Desi squeaked. Theo darted down the hall, yanked the entry door open, and sprinted across the lawn, chasing the truck. His boots were heavy, and the pain in his head, shoulder, and ankle burned like white fire. The truck passed the next house where Theo assumed it would stop next, but kept on driving. All the cans he was running by had been emptied. The terrible thought occurred to him. His house had been the last one on the pickup route, and the massive vehicle wasn't stopping any time soon. He quickened his pace, but so did the truck. He peered into the back of the trash hold, searching for any sign of the bear amongst the banana peels, foam cups, and torn bags. A hint of red could be seen in the deep corner just below the hydraulic compactor press. It was the heart the teddy bear held at its chest. He located his beloved toy and grabbed onto the cold steel of the rim. Pushing himself up, Theo got his chest over the edge, his boots dangling above the moving street. Without warning, the brakes hissed and the truck stopped, throwing Theo onto the pile of rubbish. One of the bear's legs was pinched in a corner between two metal plates. He pulled the bear free, tearing off the leg. He tossed the toy out of the truck and onto the street. Now all he had to do was climb out of the truck and make it to the pavement. Dark engulfed him as the sound of motors pumping hydraulic fluid screeched from the truck's crushing jaws. The piercing sound, the smell of rot, and the black was the last thing Theo remembered. Remembered was the key word. Remembering meant you could recall an experience later. If he had died in the truck, he wouldn't be remembering anything. He'd be dead. But he did remember. According to Theo, that had to mean he was alive. Theo's eyes opened, or he woke up, or both. He wasn't sure. He was sitting in his easy chair. It faced the center of the living room instead of the TV. Someone had moved his chair. The living room was clean, very clean. Everything was in its place as it should be, with the exception of his chair. Only the room was different, very different. The mantel still held his army trinkets. The remotes were lined uniformly as he had always kept them, and all of Desi's toys were cleaned up and put away. Toys, he thought. He looked to the end of the mantel. The bear was still missing. He felt his gut boil, but was distracted by other particular changes in the room. Big changes. White folding chairs were placed carefully around the room, and flowers were set out against a wall, surrounding an enlarged photo of himself wearing his army service uniform. He remembered the picture. He was only 22 when the photo was taken, but why the hell was it surrounded by red, white, and blue carnations and lilies? He attempted to pry his body out of his chair. His arms wouldn't move. Terror struck him. He tried turning his head. Nothing. He felt his lungs breathing, his heart beating, his head and shoulder pain, but did not feel his sore ankle. It must have healed. Theo couldn't move his fingers, wiggle his toes, or even blink. Was he paralyzed? That's what happened, he thought. He was crushed by the truck and paralyzed from the neck down. That had to be the reason for his inability to move. But wouldn't he still be able to blink his eyes and speak if he had control of his face? He couldn't feel his tongue or his jaw. Just his eyeballs, heart, and lungs could be felt and accounted for. Was this somehow a full-body paralyzation that took away all voluntary control? He would sooner choose death, any day. Theo just sat in his chair facing the room, examining its details. It's all he had the ability to do. Why does this look like my funeral? He questioned internally. The idea made him ache. His breaths quickened and his pulse raced. If he could tremble, he would have. Allison walked silently into the room. She was wearing a long black pleated dress and charcoal heels. A lit cigarette was held between her fingers. Her eyes were exhausted and almost looked bruised from grief. He knew that look. That's exactly how she looked when her father died 4 years ago. She had spent an entire week in bed, and he felt helpless the entire time she mourned the loss alone, refusing to allow him by her side. Allison sat in the folding chair closest to the army photo and covered her face with her hand. She wept and smoked, just as she had for her father. Theo wondered why she wasn't looking at him. He couldn't be dead. He was alive. He couldn't move, but he felt alive. He could see, think, move his eyes, and experience emotion, extreme emotion. For the next 17 painful minutes, he felt nothing but somber, terrible bereavement as his wife cried into her hand. She never once laid eyes on him as he sat desperately and furiously in his chair, unable to move a muscle. Allison stood. Her eyes glanced in his direction. Finally, he thought. I'm here. I'm right here, he screamed in his brain. Her tortured expression did not change as she approached the chair. She lifted Theo out of his seat and took him into her arms. Baffled beyond any words, he went mad with confusion. How had she picked me up? He pondered wildly. He was distracted by the warmth of her arms and the smell of tobacco smoke combined with a soothing pinch of perfume. She had only worn that perfume for special occasions. He had not smelled it in years. 2 new realizations hit him. He could feel and he could smell. Tiny steps, but at least they were in the right direction. But why couldn't he move? How could she be holding him, and why was he so high above the ground? The carpet looked as though it was 20 feet away, and she was moving freely while clutching him like a baby. A thought occurred to Theo that hadn't before. The thought struck him like a club to the head and made him feel incredibly stupid. He took a breath of relief. This was a dream, he concluded. One of those dreams you hear about but don't understand until you have one yourself. Sleep paralysis and night terrors. He always heard them mentioned and felt sorry for the poor saps that had them. Now he was having his, and it was awful. However, understanding the condition gave him comfort, enough comfort to help him deal with the nightmare until he woke up. It's not like he had a choice. Sleep paralysis, he thought. That's what it had to be. There was no other explanation. He was dreaming about his own funeral, and it felt real as hell. Desi entered the living room. He wore a black jacket and a small necktie with gray pants. His expression was flat and lifeless. He hugged his mother the same way he had when she came home that day with groceries. Theo could see him below from his wife's tight embrace. Desi sniffled and wiped his eyes, a sound Theo knew all too well and still fresh in his mind from the trash bin incident yesterday, or days ago, or a week ago for all he knew. He wasn't sure how far into the future he had traveled in this dream. He shrugged off the thought. Allison sank to one knee. Theo was now eye to eye with his son, examining his sad face. He sorely wanted to hold his son and tell him how much he loved him. If he could move, he'd take him to the nearest store with a toy section and buy him everything he wanted. He'd even take out a loan for it. A small loan, of course. Allison spoke. Your dad wanted you to have this when you were older. It was very special to him and he wanted you to have it. I think you're ready now. I know you'll take good care of him, she whispered. Theo felt more confusion as his son took him into the crook of his arm and held him close. Allison stood and ran her hands through her son's blonde locks. Why don't you go brush your hair, sweetie? Look good for Daddy, okay? She asked kindly. Okay, Desi said. Theo's son proceeded to carry him across the room, up the stairs, around the corner, and into the master bedroom located in his and Allison's bedroom. Theo was placed on the long vanity sink. The light was flipped on, and his son took a comb from a drawer. He began meticulously combing each follicle individually. Theo's heart drummed. It almost burst from his chest due to what he saw before him. He was sitting on the cold marble of the counter. He could feel it icy against his ass and one of his legs. He was facing the mirror. His reflection looked nothing like him. He didn't even look human. Everything he had experienced since waking up made grisly sense, and all the pieces came together before his round, black, shiny eyes. In the crystal-clear reflection, his mother's teddy bear stared lifelessly back at him. He clutched the red heart against his fuzzy chest, and his leg had been torn off, just as it had in the garbage truck. He ran through every painful detail in his throbbing head, and everything fit perfectly and seamlessly like a jigsaw puzzle. He was the teddy bear. That's why he couldn't move. That's why he was given to his son, and the missing leg was the reason he couldn't feel the pain in his ankle. The bear was missing from the mantel in the living room, and he was thoughtfully placed in his easy chair because the bear was the one thing in the house that represented himself other than his real body. No doubt put there by Allison. This nightmare made too much sense. Dreams are supposed to be a mismatched stew of random thoughts that make absolutely no sense at all. That's what made them dreams. Theo refused the idea of any of this being real, and he refused to even consider that his human body could be in a coffin somewhere. Ignorantly, logically, he clung to the sleep paralysis hypothesis like a grounded water pipe during a typhoon. His miniature heart still raced. Desi finished crafting his hairdo, replaced the comb, and took his dad from the sink. Theo was carried to the bed and gently laid on his own pillow, facing the ceiling. His son pulled the covers over his tiny body. Allison entered. Uncle Louis and Aunt Carol just got here. Grandma is on her way. Let's get downstairs and greet everyone as they arrive, okay? She requested softly. Desi placed his hand on his father's chest, upon the silk heart below the comforter. I'm going to put him right here, in Dad's spot, he said lovingly. Allison nodded and smiled. I'm sure he would have loved that, she replied. The child caught up to his mother as they both stepped out of the room and closed the door. Theo was left to his thoughts. Reason, fear, and paranoia battled for countability in his mind. The ceiling fan turned slowly as his ideas churned, processing everything he had witnessed in the last hour, or however long it had been. He knew he was in the living room for about 28 minutes because he could see the wall clock from his chair. Any time passing after that was a guess. He was exhausted from worry, stress, confusion, and aggravation. His eyes felt heavy, but he couldn't close them. He was blessed with fatigue. He smiled internally at the thought of falling asleep, and was elated to realize he was slowly fading into slumber. The white ceiling dimmed, and the fan blades blurred. Theo would wake up soon, and this nightmare would end. He woke up again. The ceiling was dark and the fan still turned. The sound of distant chatter flowed into the room from under the closed door. He heard the toilet flush from the bathroom in the hall. A door opened, closed, and footsteps jogged down the padded stairs on the other side of his bedroom wall. Tapping plates, a laugh here and there, and young squeals from stray children peppered the cocktail of barely audible pressures his ears picked up and translated for his brain. No, he thought, this can't still be happening. Insane screaming from inside his little felt head exploded into the air around him in complete and total silence. He shouted, roared, cried, and groaned with unbridled agony, with not so much as a whisper to the room around him. His eyes were frozen open. The movement of the blades and the noise from the living room was his only concept of time. Hours or seconds or weeks seemed to pass. The ceiling stayed black, the fan spun, and the chatter continued as the nightmare unceasingly drew on. The bedroom door opened. He couldn't see who entered. Two voices spoke in whispers from the foot of the bed. He recognized Allison's musical tone, but had no idea who the older male's voice could be. He listened intently, examining every word. I'm proud of you, Allison, the man said. You're holding your composure for the sake of your family, and it's something to be admired. But it can be damaging as well. It's okay to cry. Everyone will understand. Don't keep it all pent up. You need a ventilator. The backdraft will hit you with a vengeance when you're left to your own tonight. Theo heard the flick of a lighter. The waft of cigarette smoke filled the room. I know, Allison replied. I'll deal with that my own way. I just want to get through today without making a mess of myself in front of my mother and my son. Is that wrong? She asked. That's between you and God, the man said. I'm just an extra hand, a vessel, if you will. I'm here to help in any way I can. Thank you for that beautiful service, Father, Allison whispered. You're blessed with an incredible way with words. I just wish he could have been here to hear it. Father fucking Francine, Theo roared. That son of a bitch. What the hell was he doing speaking to Allison in private, and why the hell was he in my bedroom? He thought violently. Hatred seethed through his miniature bear body, and he wanted to choke the priest out with his undersized bare hands. Theo imagined all the things he would do to that righteous prick as soon as he woke up and got his body back. He knew the thought made no sense at all, but he decided to ride his anger out and let it flourish, even if it was vastly unreasonable. Theodore was a good man, Father Francine said sincerely. He just didn't realize it. If he would have given me the time of day, I could have talked to him as a man, not as a priest. God's voice can reach out to us in many forms, no matter where we are or what state of mind we're in. But it's up to us to go to him. Nobody is dragged to his grace, kicking and screaming. Sometimes we need to just close our eyes, let go of our pride, and just trust. Allison replied, Talking to him wouldn't have changed what happened. Don't assume it would have. This wasn't your fault. I guess we all blame ourselves when a travesty happens, partially or wholly, the father said. It's in our nature to regret. It can keep us focused on what we can do now to prevent, or it can keep us sightless, stuck in the belief that there is nothing we can do to change things. Theo's a smart man. I just pray he kept his mind open, just a little, in this world and the world after. Theo didn't dare admit to himself that he was touched by what the priest had said, or maybe he had already. Based on the current circumstances, and in the light of his present suffering, he almost wished he had spoken to Francine, as a man, not as a priest. Obviously not as a priest. No, Theo thought stubbornly. Father Francine is a complacent ass. He had already duped his wife, and he had almost hooked Theo as well, just now. Religious figures always had their tricks, agendas, schemes, and their ways with words, as Allison had just stated not a minute ago. Theo built a metaphorical wall around his mind and decided to dismiss anything the priest had to say. He wouldn't become a blind sheep, obeying every word set before him by a shepherd. If someone is preaching obedience, they're selling you something, every time. Thank you so much, Father. You have no idea how much I appreciate you being here, for me, for Theo, and for Desi. It means more to me than you know. Allison's breath was barely audible. Of course, my child, he said. Anything you need, always. Father? She asked. Desperation lingered on her breath. Yes, Allison, he whispered. Do you think you could be here right now for me as a man, not as a priest? Could you do that for me? Allison asked. What in the holy hell did that mean? Theo bellowed. His blood boiled over with outrage and blind indignation. He tried convincing himself that he had misunderstood his wife's words, but there was no wholesome way to interpret Allison's breathy request. He tried moving his 3 mini limbs through sheer will and intense searing emotion, but the stuffed bear laid motionless on the pillow, under the covers, writhing with hate. Of course, Father Francine said. Theo swore he heard the sound of hands moving against fabric and the taps of light, passionate kissing. Their breathing became heavier and motions became louder. Suddenly, something heavy struck the bed and Theo was knocked off the pillow and onto the floor. Breaths became gasps, and a pair of Allison's panties fell right before Theo's wide, outraged eyes. All he could do was stare at the lacy pattern on his wife's black lingerie as the sounds of their lovemaking echoed against the walls and into his impeccable, perfect, furry little ears. Theo sat at a round table seated in a chair sized perfectly for his stature in Desi's messy bedroom. A wicker picnic hat rested on his fuzzy brown head, and a cowboy kerchief was tied around his neck. His dinner guests included a green rabbit, a wind-up robot, and a yellow triceratops sporting a pair of aviator sunglasses. A thick foam slice of pizza was served before him on a paper plate with a side of plastic carrots as a supplement to counter the carbs in the Chicago-style entree. Desi was dressed as a fireman, pouring imaginary coffee for each member at the table. Decaf for the rabbit. He evidently had an allergy to wheat, as the 3 old hosts had announced just minutes ago over dessert, which was butter on ice cream with snow peas as a garnish. Desi hummed a song to himself he had heard on the TV as he added French fries to the coffee. He had heard the song about 4 weeks ago and was still humming it today. Theo longed for the next childish tune that would catch his son's fancy. To what? He did not care. No matter how repetitive or monotonous it would be, at least the next song would be different. Theo had somewhat of an idea regarding the amount of time that had passed since he was blessed with an adorable yet inoperable body. He had lost his precise count at around 22 days, and Allison was beginning to talk about her mother's birthday, so he figured he was at about 5 weeks since the transformation. He had long abandoned the idea of sleep paralysis, unless he was in some kind of coma. He was convinced this was real. It was real every day, and every day was the same. He'd wake up at 8 in the morning, cursing God's name for another day in purgatory. Breakfast was watching Desi play with his food. He'd take a walk around the block with the family at 10 and visit the park on Sundays and Wednesdays, attendance mandatory. Lunch was at noon, followed by pizza and carrots with his 3 friends, and dinner was at 6. Desi would pick at his food again. At least one night a week, Father Francine would show up, visit for 10 minutes, then disappear upstairs with Allison for another session between the sheets. Bedtime began with a story read by his cheating wife, and it was lights out 20 minutes later. Theo would fall asleep beside his son, awaiting another inevitable repeat of the day he had just involuntarily participated in. His mind was turning into mush. He knew he should be appreciating the newfound time he was spending with his son, but he did not. Not from the end of day 1 of the humdrum. He wondered if this could go on forever. After about 35 days of this bullshit, he was damn sure that it would. What would happen when Desi grew up? Would Theo end up with his grandkids or on a shelf in a dime store gathering dust and waiting for the next child to begin the process all over again? Child after child, decade after decade? Theo hated. He hated harder than he had ever hated before, and he wished nothing but death to every member of the human race, including his family. He longed for the destruction of Earth so he would finally be put to some kind of rest. He wanted that, far more than he wanted his easy chair, his TV, and a beer. His mind was a vengeful lump of excrement, begging for death and blind to any form of change or hope. Desi approached the little table holding a plastic treasure chest filled with fairy dust and announced to the group that Happy Thoughts would activate it. What Desi would use the dust for after that, Theo had no idea and didn't give a damn. "What's your happy thought, Robert?" Desi asked the green rabbit. He leaned in close, smiled, and shouted, "Birthday parties! I love birthday parties!" The boy bounced on his knees and inched closer to the triceratops. "What's your happy thought, Cameron?" He leaned in again. "Football! I love football!" he cheered. Desi got to his feet and came up behind Theo, whispering into his ear, "What's your happy thought, Teddy?" It wasn't until that very moment that Theo realized that Teddy was short for Theodore, the name appearing on his birth certificate, and possibly by this point his death certificate. He had always gone by Theo. The irony of his transformation into a stuffed bear relating so directly to his given name should have intrigued him, but it did just the opposite. It infuriated him. Desi repeated himself. "What's your happy thought, Teddy?" "Fuck your happy thought," Theo snapped. "And fuck this picnic, and fuck this day after day bullshit." It didn't matter what he thought, happy or otherwise. Nobody could or would ever hear him. "Do you have a happy thought?" his son asked a third time. Theo was so beside himself with white-hot anger he wished his son could hear him say, "Go screw yourself," just once, out loud, and he'd be satisfied. At least for a few days. Desi gave up and bounced on his knees in the direction of the robot. All at once, chills ran through Theo as an observation hit him like a punch to the gut. Desi got an imaginary answer right away from the rabbit and the dinosaur, but asked Teddy 3 times with no made-up response. If Desi was simply playing pretend with his toys, he would have made up an answer for Teddy, just as he did with the others. The thought was daunting. There had to be a reason for it. Just as Desi asked the robot what his happy thought was, Allison let out an odd, intense shriek from downstairs. Then a crack rang out like the sound of a chair falling over. Something was wrong. Desi jumped to his feet and disappeared into the hall. His feet hopped down the steps and the thuds grew distant. Silence followed. He didn't hear Desi. He didn't hear his wife. No banging, no knock at the door, no footsteps, no phone ringing. Just silence for minutes now, as though the house was completely abandoned. The light cascading through the bedroom window faded and night fell. Theo sat awake in his little chair through the hours until blue, then orange dawnlight emerged. Something was very, very wrong. Not a sound for at least 12 hours. He pondered fearfully, desperately considering every possible scenario that would lead to Allison's shout, Desi's absence, and the utter quiet throughout the night as he sat at his extended picnic. And why had Desi not received a happy thought from Theo when asked? Nothing made sense. But considering everything since the garbage truck incident, being transformed into a bear made equal sense. The day passed and night came again. Another day, another night. 2 days now. Absolute hell. Where was Desi? What happened to Allison? Around late afternoon, Theo heard footsteps. Little footsteps. Thank God, he thought. Desi walked through the door slowly, rubbing his eyes. His hair was disheveled. He looked like he had just woken up from an extended nap, and he was still in his fireman uniform. Dry chocolate and crumbs were smeared across his mouth and cheek. What had he been doing for the last 2 days? Was Allison dead? Father Francine's last visit had just been a few dawns ago, so he wouldn't be returning for another booty call for another 4 or 5 days. Someone had to call or visit. Anyone. Some competent adult had to realize that something was wrong. Desi lazily took Theo by the foot and carried him slowly into the hall. His hat and kerchief fell to the floor. Desi descended the stairs, and Theo finally got to see the living room again. It looked the same as it had the last morning he had come home from work. A mess. Toys and playthings scattered the floor with coloring pages and crayons littered like debris. But no Allison. Theo smelled a foul and pungent odor as he was carried into the kitchen. Then, there she was. Allison laid on the tile beside the counter where the blue spill of sports aid had been. A large silver kitchen knife rested beside her limp palm. Her skin was a greenish-yellow tint, and fluid had dripped from her nose and dried on her cheek. She was dead. For a split second he wondered how it happened, but he quickly remembered her heart condition. It must have been a stroke or heart attack. At least that's what her doctor was always warning her about. Every hateful thought Theo had towards his wife burned to cinders, and terrible sadness engulfed him. If he was able to cry, he would have. He sobbed with heaving breaths as his mind screamed with anguish as his teddy bear face remained still and motionless. Desi approached the body and wiped his eyes. "I'm hungry," he moaned. Theo roared with agony. His wife, who he loved, was dead, and his 3-year-old son was now left to his own devices alone. Alone for 2 days now. Desi stood over his dead mother waiting for a response and kept repeating, "I'm hungry, Mommy, and I want water," over and over again. A chair had been pushed against the open pantry and the open refrigerator. Cookie, pretzel, and granola bar wrappers covered the tiles like the toys in the living room. Desi had eaten like a king for most likely a day and was now out of food. He hadn't had anything to drink since Allison had died. There were no open bottles, and he knew his son couldn't reach the sink or the fridge dispenser. Desi approached the knife. No, 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 Theo thought. Don't touch that! He took the knife from the floor and looked around the kitchen. He reached up and placed it carefully on the kitchen table, and let it be. Good boy, Theo sighed. At least Desi was smart enough to know that knives were dangerous and had to be put away. Theo was carried around the house as Desi searched the bedrooms, bathroom, halls, and dining room. He was mortified by the feeling of helplessness. There was absolutely nothing he could do to help his son. He wanted so badly to help. Their tour ended in the downstairs hallway beside the front door. Theo dangled from Desi's fingers as he attempted to turn the doorknob. He grunted as his small hand helplessly pawed at the brass, but it wouldn't matter anyway. The deadbolt was locked, and Desi wouldn't be able to reach or undo it. Desi gave up and stopped in front of the garage door. He just stood there, staring at it. Oh, God, no. Leave the garage alone, Theo whispered. He was placed on the floor as his son ran into the kitchen. Wood scratched against ceramic as Desi pushed the chair from the kitchen table down the hall to the garage door. He climbed into the seat and used both hands to turn the knob. The door opened. The chair was removed, and the door swung wide open. Theo sat in front of the open boundary as the little boy flipped on the lights and examined the deadly state in which his father had always left his garage. The chop saw sat on the floor, 2 gasoline canisters beside it. A rusty, tetanus-covered muffler, an open bag of lawn fertilizer, 3 open cans of motor oil, and a pouch of rat poison were all exposed and available for Desi to do as he pleased, with extreme hunger and thirst raging within his throat and belly. Theo's thoughts went into a frenzy. He clung to the one concept that could keep his son from certain death, and that was his repeated past instructions. Don't touch anything in Daddy's garage. Desi wasn't stupid. He was a smart kid, and he could remember absolutely everything, especially the things he and Allison hadn't wanted him to remember. Theo watched Desi softly approach the open container of lawn fertilizer. The pellets were brown and looked like pretzel rods. Theo's heart raced. Desi stared at the pretzels and took a long, hard look. Then, he took a step back. He pointed at the bag and shouted sternly in his squeaky voice, Daddy says don't touch. Theo sighed with exhausted relief. He was a smart kid. That deterrence would hopefully keep Desi safe from everything else in the garage, if he held to it. But if someone didn't show up soon, he could starve to death or die of dehydration. Desi headed back to the open door. He placed his hand high up onto the light switch and took one last look around the garage. He glanced at the tools, car parts, open bottles, and yard tools, then paused. Desi said one word that made Theo die inside. Blue? His son said curiously. Against the far wall beside the lawnmower sat an open half bottle of antifreeze. The liquid was blue. The words Theo had spoken to Desi weeks ago came back like a vengeful phantom and repeated in his head. If it's blue, you can drink it. It's okay if your mom didn't tell you if you could have it. Insane screaming resonated inside the helpless little bear's head as Desi walked across the cold concrete floor and easily lifted the antifreeze bottle from the floor. He drank, eagerly, just like he had with the sports aid. He pulled the bottle away from his mouth and took a breath. A little blue mustache appeared above his upper lip. Immediately, Desi's eyes went wide. His body shook as if experiencing a shiver from cold. He began to cry, but stopped. He just stood there, holding the bottle in both hands. He opened his mouth and blue liquid spewed onto the floor. Desi shook again. His body continued to vomit until nothing was left in his stomach. Heaving spasms overtook him. He dropped the bottle onto the floor and collapsed, his mouth still open and heaving. Theo watched his son tremble on the floor and ease into stillness. He laid on the cold floor beside the lawnmower and died in his fireman costume, under the silent hum of the garage light. Theo had passed sadness, turmoil, and madness, and plummeted straight into paralyzing delirium. It was as though a teddy bear lobotomy had been performed. The part of his brain that allowed him to rationalize shriveled up and rotted between his fuzzy ears. He could only think in brief, short whispers, and his mind grew further and further away from coherence. Anger, sadness, and hostility took over completely, leaving patience, understanding, and solicitude to decay. For 5 days, Theo sat on the floor facing the open garage between the bodies of his wife and his son. Cursing hateful banter and screams of grief and unrelenting misery erupted behind his round, shiny eyes. One day, around mid-afternoon, a knock came at the door. Theo's head finally silenced after 120 hours of angry noise. The knock came again. He remained silent, just listening. The deadbolt unlocked, and so did the knob. The door swung open, and Father Francine peeked his head inside. "Allison?" he called out. Silence. He stepped into the hall and swiftly made his way into the kitchen. "Oh, gracious, no!" he shouted. Theo heard the priest begin to sob and inhale sharply. "Desi?" he cried, then called the name again. His shoes tapped across the floor, down the hall, and up the stairs. "Desi, where are you?" he screamed desperately as he ran back down again. He stopped suddenly beside Theo and before the open garage door. The priest yelped sadly and ran to Desi's side. Taking the boy's head in his hand and covering his mouth with the other, he cried over the deceased mother and son. Theo just stared, wide-eyed and lobotomized. The authorities were called, and the bodies were taken downtown. Father Francine made funeral arrangements for the both of them. He brought Allison's mother to the house to go through some personal things and prepare for the burial. Their final resting place would be St. Alexander's Cemetery, located a few blocks from Allison's church. Theo's mother-in-law cried as she clutched an armful of documents and a few treasured items, including the crucifix that Theo so hated. She thanked the father for coming with her and left the home, unable to bear staying in the house for another minute. The priest took one last look around before closing the door to depart and noticed the bear on the floor. He stepped over, picked up Theo, and took a long, examining look at his eyes, heart, and missing leg. He raised his eyebrows and took Theo with him, placing him in a pocket and locking the door. Theo was placed on the mahogany podium as Father Francine gave an extended eulogy before 2 open caskets to a filled church. The service went on as Theo looked upon all the faces present, some of which he hadn't seen in years, along with many members of his own family. The priest closed with a reading from the book of John and ended with a prayer. The congregation rose slowly and softly filed past the decorated caskets, giving their final respects. The church emptied and Father Francine remained at the podium. He took the bear into his soft hand and looked upon its eyes. "Theo," he said to the stuffed toy, "are you ready to come home?" he asked in a gentle voice. Deep in the recesses of Theo's barely operating mind, he muscled out one conscious answer, an answer that would be the one final cognitive thought he would ever muster. Theo reached deep down into his soul and pieced together his last final inaudible words. "Fuck you, priest!" Theo roared. Father Francine sighed, looked upon the bear as though he had just lost a child, and a tear fell from his eye. He slowly walked to Desi's open casket, placed the teddy bear in the crook of his little arm, and shut the lid. Theo would go on to his son's final resting place, awake, sentient, and tormented for the remainder of eternity by his own carelessness, temperament, and ignorance. There was indeed a place for everything, as Theo had so strictly believed. A place for playthings, a place for the discarded, and a place for his ass. And this place was where he would remain in the dark forever. 1 hour after the garbage truck accident, Theo's body was loaded into an ambulance beside Allison and Father Francine's parked vehicles. Theo's wife cried into the priest's shoulder as he comforted her, a lit cigarette pinched in her fingers. Desi stood beside his mother, holding her by the hand, his face flat and expressionless. "Don't worry," the father said kindly. "Theo was a good man. He just didn't realize it. God can speak to us no matter where we are, in this life and in the next. But it's up to us to go to Him." This was a reading of Forgotten Toys, a Boohouse Books horror story written and narrated by Mark Steven Nordlund. Forgotten Toys is a Boohouse Books book, copyright Mark Steven Nordlund. All rights reserved. Find all ebooks, e-stories, and audiobooks by this author at boohousebooks.com.